Generating, analyzing, and extracting content is great. But the moment you have a lot of it, the next question is always the same. How do I find anything in here? And that's where Azure AI Search comes in. It is the backbone of nearly every serious RAG and knowledge solution on Azure. Hi, I'm Rob Folkrod, a lead technical trainer at Microsoft. In this session, we'll cover creating knowledge mining solution with Azure AI Search. We'll get to know Azure AI Search, build an index and enrich it with AI skills, then query it and explore the knowledge store. Let's finish strong with this session. A component that's been in the background for us in many different scenarios, but we haven't really focused on a whole lot, is Azure AI Search. With this search service, you have the ability to index documents, meaning to break them apart, to find the pieces of those documents, and then be able to retrieve, when looking for one of those pieces, all of the associated documents. It allows us to index them from a huge collection of sources, whether those be things like PDFs, or text documents, or video, or audio, and create these large indexes that can be accessible to our generative AI apps or to our agentic systems. As we're bringing that information in, we also have the capability of running some AI skills against the data. So what we'll see is we'll bring information in by way of a pipeline, and as that pipeline comes in, we'll have the ability to say, hey, maybe this document needs to be translated. We've seen a component for that earlier in our course. Maybe I need to perform a summary of all of this information and just get a tiny description in there. Maybe I need to extract some of the named entities, right? We've got AI components that can help along the way to build up that index so it's not just a copy of the underlying text. And finally, it has the ability to do what's called create a knowledge store. Because if I'm pulling information in from, say, a PDF, that PDF is likely to have a whole bunch of text. Well, that's easy. That can go into search pretty easily. But it's also likely to have things like images. Well, we can use AI components on those images to store a description of that image or to store tags of that image. But when I go to retrieve it, I might like the image itself. The knowledge store allows us to also keep that underlying image or video. So even though it's basically text that's inside of the index, we can have external references to the tables, to the images that we might have found in that document collection. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a look at kind of what that pipeline looks like that when we want to bring information in to Azure AI Search. So for starters, there is an extraction component. So what we're going to build is what's called an indexer. So the indexer is going to be that first step in our import process. So the job of the indexer is to go ahead and first of all, have an underlying understanding of where that data source is. It then does what's called document cracking, or breaking that document down to get the text out of that particular source. Right. Then we can include into that an enrichment pipeline. And we've talked about briefly. We'll see that again in a moment. Right. And there could be, for each document, we may have a series of fields. We build out, when we go to make this indexer, these are the pieces of information that I might want to know. I might need to know the author. I might want a description in there. I may have a group of tags. So for this document collection, much like, very similar to what we were doing with the content understanding, where we broke those down into fields, it's the same idea here. But with those fields, we also will say things like, I want to make sure that when I go to use this index later on, this field is sortable. Or this field here allows me to build facets. Maybe it's a bunch of colors, and I want to be able to say, okay, find all the things that are blue in there. And that might be something that's, quote, facetable. So the indexer allows me to establish where that is, what information I'm pulling from as I go to store that inside of AI Search. And in that process, we may have a bunch of AI skills that are complementing that data. So there are a bunch of skills in here, and you can probably guess what those skills are since we have talked about many of them along the way inside of the Foundry tools. But we can go ahead and check things like what language is it written in? Let's extract the named entities in there. Let's get some of the key phrases. Maybe we need to translate. Maybe we need here a common language for all of our data. So we might store the original, but we also might store a translation. Before we store this for too long, we may need to extract things like PII, grab the images from them, captions and tags on all those images, right? And maybe also do image text vectorization. Maybe the images themselves have text on them, and we need to extract that text itself. Right? On top of the built-in skills, you're free to build your own. Often you are looking at things like creating an Azure function, and that Azure function can receive into it. It's going to receive a record or one or more records. A record is going to be the content as the unenriched version is seen. That information is passed into your Azure function, and then your Azure function is going to do whatever magic it does and return a list of fields that can be used to store inside of the search service. Once it's been put through that pipeline, then we will configure the underlying fields. So we will say for each one of those records, anybody with a database background is familiar with having some sort of key or index that we will be looking things up by. And then for each one of those fields, we will determine things like, is this field something that is searchable? Should we have an index on that field, or is it additional metadata that we may want to present, but we don't expect someone to look that up? Maybe there is a longitude and latitude on the image where it was stored. We don't, maybe in this scenario, we don't expect folks to look things up by way of longitude and latitude, but we do expect them to be able to understand where it was. So that might be something that we have, but searchable is false. We may have things that are filterable, right? That we can say, I want to get all of the documents that have this particular quality in them. Maybe the field is the type of image, maybe it's black and white or color, and I want just to be able to filter all of the color images, right? Or maybe all of the AI generated images, right? So it might be a field that is included in that filter capability. Then you see the idea of sortable, right? There may be fields that we have, like description, that are fine to have, but seldom is anyone going to be sorting by the description of an item, right? We may want to read the description, but we're not sorting by things that start with an image of, right? Not incredibly helpful. But many other things, like the date that image was taken, that absolutely might be something that is sortable. Earlier, we just talked about the idea of facetable, right? Facets are typically used in user interfaces where I may have a list of facets like color or region, and just be able to check those items, kind of in a growth of the idea of filterable. And then finally, retrievable. When I am bringing this back, is it something that the user may see? So that's all part of building the index itself. And then lastly, as we briefly talked about earlier, what about all of that extra data? Inside of Azure AI Search, we are storing text. But that's not what we started with in many cases. So we can grab and search and retrieve all of the text representations, but odds are really good we may want to point to an original source. So we can then create a knowledge store. Typically what we're going to build is we're going to build an Azure storage account. This storage account we then associate back to that knowledge store, and things like JSON documents could be stored in there. If I'm looking up if I have a PDF and that PDF has a table in there, maybe I'm going to store a record version of that table that can be stored in there, and things like the extracted images from those. Those are all going to be stored, referenced, and keyed so that the original document, the original reference, can just point back to those items, and we can then retrieve those. All right. This may all sound a little bit vague, so let's walk through the process of building an index, getting it all indexed, and then this may sound a little vague, so let's go take a look at an example. In this example here, we're going to build an index, we're going to run it through a pipeline. Then when we've got it, we're going to query that up, and we'll see the information persisted in that knowledge store. All right, folks, let's take a look at what adding a little AI search does for our application. So we'll build an index, actually a couple of different ways, and then we will query that up and hook it up into an agent just for fun. So what I have already taken the opportunity to do is build the search service so that we don't have to see me clicking through. The portal here to build a resource. So I've got a search service here, and there's a couple of ways of adding the index, the thing that we want searched. We do have a quick little importer wizard right here. And in the importer, we can then specify where is that underlying data, whether it's in Blob or Data Lake, right? We're going to grab our Blob storage here. I've got a few mechanisms of which we can pull this in. One is we've got a few mechanisms to pull this in. The first is just to do kind of a straightforward keyword search, and this will build that pipeline that we talked about earlier. We'll specify where our data lives. In this case, it lives in a storage account. We will specify what that container is. That is our documents, where they live there, and how we're going to authenticate. In this case here, I've done a little bit of work ahead of time to give permissions for a managed identity. I gave the search service the blob data reader in the storage account. So we'll use that. System assigned is fine. Then in that pipeline, what are the AI enrichments that we want to be able to add to all of this? Will be the next phase here. So we can say, so this is going to use those underlying tools to do things like extract individual phrases there, look for named entities inside of it. We can configure what those entities are. For example, should we be extracting persons or locations, organizations, right? What are the things in there that we want to bring out? Should we be looking for images inside of text, right? Do we want to generate tags for those? Do we want to categorize the content that we're finding inside of the images? In this case, a collection of PDFs. Okay. And then should we use like the Foundry tools to handle all that? In this case, we'll use those underlying tools. And then when we're building the index, we get to see what are the facets, the fields that we're going to be extracting from all of that data. So we can see things like we're going to pull the title out and key phrases. We just saw that there are going to be persons and locations that are going to be extracted in there. Things like how, looking at the metadata, how big is the document? Those are all different parameters that we could go ahead and configure. And for each one of those, if we were to go into, say, title, for example, we could go and configure that field. And you remember we were talking about things like, should this be a field that we could retrieve, kind of like part of the select statement? Should we be able to filter on that? And should we do um, free text search on that content? So yes, it should be retrievable. Just want the titles. I want that to be filterable and searchable. Right? So we can go ahead and save all of those. We can make that sortable as well, I suppose. Right? And then we would do that for each one of the fields that were interesting to us. Then we're going to be scheduling the index. How often should this run? For our purpose right now, I'll just say run once in there, and then give that a name, and off it goes. We would click create here, and it would build that index. Now that would take a fair amount of time, so I'm going to actually cheat just a little bit because I've already run through exactly what you have seen right here. I'm going to leave that behind. I know I feel bad, but I'm going to do it anyway. And we've got an index in here that I've named standby. And so inside of standby, we have 6 documents in there. And so we can start pulling that information in. We'll go ahead and use a little JSON view in here. And I'll just select up all the documents, little JSON search in here. And so getting the response back, down just a little bit here, we can see here that we did grab all 6 documents, just said grab everything and account. And so from those documents, we're seeing things like the locations, right? That was extracted from that location, and key phrases that were in there. Right? So we can see those. Right? If we just wanted to be a little bit more particular in there, we can just say select, just give me the title and the locations. Okay. So here we have title, locations for document number 1, and then title locations, right? Basically, those of you familiar with SQL, the select is very much the field list that we wanted to pull back. If we're looking for a particular keyword here, we're going to search on New York. So in terms of documents that mention New York, we've got the New York PDF that mentioned it. Margie's Travel mentioned the keyword New York. And San Francisco actually mentioned the word New York in there at some point in time. All right. So with this import, we could build an application that would query this up and use those capabilities. But what I also want to show is where would we go in terms of making this available to something like an agent. We have another, I'm going to head back to my overview here. We're going to add index. Instead of using the generic import, we're going to add an index. Edit, we're going to try that again. We're going to go ahead and import data one more time. Again, we're going to pull this from storage, but here we can do things like I want to make this a RAG system, right? I want to ingest the text, and I want to do things like OCR the images and have this available to my agents. So I'm going to do click on the RAG option. I'm going to pick the same storage account that's inside of documents there. We could go ahead and enable things like document layout detection. Here it would be asking us for starting that over. So I want to create an index then that is a little bit easier to get to from our agent. Import this real quick so that we can get this available to our agent. We're going to click on our import here. Again, same storage account. In this case, we're going to do a multimodal RAG import. We're going to pick our storage account and the documents section. We will authenticate by way of managed identity. Now, as we go to shred that document, we'll extract the information from the PDF here. As we go to extract that information, we need to describe what the images are. So there's an image verbalization. So this is that image identification from a large language model. So we'll pick our Foundry here. We'll pick the project that's capable of doing this. And here we can pick which model that we want to describe those images. Mini here would be just fine. Do something like that. And we will acknowledge that it's going to cost a little bit. And then for the text vectorization, once we have verbalization of the images, those images and all of the text need to be vectorized. So I'm picking our Foundry, I'm picking our demo project, and I am picking the embeddings section. We will have that set up as a system identity as well. We will acknowledge that. And then when they go to export the images, right, because we're shredding that PDF, we're taking those images, those are going to be standalone components as well. Where should those go? So here we're going to put that into storage, specifically in an output container right there. And again, managed identity to authenticate. All right. Then how often should we do this? Here they're talking about the indexing of the fields. Which fields do we want to bring in? We can preview and edit those as we saw in the earlier example. Again, we'll run this once. We would give this a great name, Margie's Travel Documents, and we would create. Again, to save us a little bit of time, we go into create here. We have a knowledge source that was set up from all that, travel documents. And over the top of that, we can then build a knowledge base. This knowledge base here allows us to then access this from our agent. So to see that in play, let's go into Foundry here. Let's go build a brand new agent. Call it Margie's agent. In Margie's agent, we'll eliminate web search here just so that we know that the data is coming from our documents. This is not a mandatory part, but it just makes my life just a little bit easier. So we're not allowed to go and query outside of that source. And we will bring in a knowledge base. We'll connect up to Foundry here. That is our AI search instance. And we can pick the Margie's Travel Documents knowledge base. So now that we have that knowledge base available, we will throw in some instructions to say, hey, use that knowledge base. We'll do a quick little save here. And tell me about New York hotels. If all goes well, first it'll prompt me because it is using MCP to bring this forward. So it will prompt, hey, can I query up that from Margie's Travel? I'm going to approve this tool going forward. That's been approved. There we go. And you may recall, or maybe not, that these are the three hotels that are represented in the Margie's Travel New York documents. But that was just text. So let's go a little bit further. Any images of pyramids. So there should be two documents in here that have something that resembles a pyramid. This is just looking at the images themselves. There's no text in there that references those, so we're allowed here. We'll go ahead and approve. And we've got Margie's Travel here as images of the Transamerica Pyramid, which is in San Francisco. So if we were to look at the San Francisco document there, we would see that that pyramid is available to us. All right. All right. So what we have seen here is an end-to-end search. We went and built a couple of indexes and then made them available to our agent. All right, let's go wrap this up. All right, so last one. Let's see what y'all remember. Okay. Which component of an Azure AI search solution is scheduled to extract and enrich data to populate an index? That is the indexer. That's its job. Maybe run once, maybe it'll run on a repeated basis. Which service supports built-in AI skills in Azure AI Search? Yeah, we've seen them a lot in this course, the Foundry tools. And what kind of projection results in a relational data schema from extracted fields? That's going to be a table. So in this, we have seen that Azure AI Search is the backbone for our RAG and knowledge mining solutions. The first thing that we build when we're importing manually in here is we're going to build some sort of indexer. Its job is to look through the records, the fields, the underlying data source, and start importing those records. Along the way, in that pipeline, we're going to have a series of AI skills. Those skills, their job is to enrich the data that we're bringing forward. Maybe we need to extract text from some of the images. Maybe we need descriptions of those images. Maybe we need to translate the text. We can use all of those tools that we've been seeing all through this course for that import enrichment. Each index is going to have a series of attributes for each one of the fields that we're going to have. Is a field something that can be searched and filtered? Is it something that we can sort on, et cetera, and so forth? All right. And then finally, there's a knowledge store when we need to store more than just simple text. In this session, we made our content findable. We covered Azure AI Search, built and enriched an index, and queried it. And that wraps topic 4. Look at what we learned. We taught apps to see with vision-enabled chat apps and content understanding images. We taught them to create, generating images and video from prompts. And we taught them to extract and find, pulling data from documents, audio, and video with content understanding, and indexing it all with Azure AI Search. That's a complete visual AI skill set. Your apps and agents can now see, generate, analyze, and search across visual data, a massive expansion of what they can do. And that's a wrap on Develop AI apps and agents on Azure. Take a moment and look at the distance we've traveled. We started with the foundation in topic 1, building generative AI apps, learning the platform, designing chat experiences, and calling tools to ground our responses. We optimized cost and performance and applied responsible AI from day 1. Because in topic 2, we got to the main event, agents. Software that just doesn't respond, it acts. You built your first Foundry agent, extended it with custom tools, an MCP, and grounded it with Foundry IQ. Finally, we coded with Microsoft Agent Framework and orchestrated multi-agent solutions. Then in topic 3, we gave agents a voice and a vocabulary, analyzing text with a language service, connecting through language and speech MCP servers, and building multimodal audio chat experiences, working with speech to text and text to speech, going live with Voice Live and translating across languages. And we've just seen topic 4. We taught them to see, understand, and search. That's the full arc, from a single prompt and response to apps and agents that read and listen and speak and see and drive outcomes on your behalf. If you're interested in going further, you can find all the content at aka.ms/course-AI-103, where you can find each topic or learning path. All the content and labs are there for you to explore and expand on. It's been my privilege to walk you through this journey. For the last time, thank you for participating in this Develop AI Apps and Agents on Azure course. I hope you have found the content useful and interesting, and that this propels you to learn and build more with Microsoft Foundry. The learning never stops, and I invite you one last time to search for your next favorite topic on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn. Until next time, go build something great.